In this shocking episode, I measure. I order more tubing, but this time not in the mail. I measure again. I melt some metal. Why am I still measuring? For those that are new to this channel, this is my 1996 GMC Sonoma. I know it doesn't look like that, but what I've been doing is rebuilding the custom frame, and lately I've been working on the 4-link suspension. If you want to get caught up on the 4-link suspension progress, I will leave a link to the playlist over here. I'm excited because it's time to work on the shocks. So I have a confession to make. I was actually filming before I had the other video posted because I thought I'd be able to get ahead of things and speed up the time between videos. Well, I failed. I ended up having 3 different versions of the shocks. Now I'll take you through it, but I'll jump in every now and then just to speed things up. So here's my first iteration. Now, full transparency, I already did a little bit of measurements, but I will take you through what I did and where I am now in my thinking on how I'm going to mount them. So I started off here in the back. I always had it pictured in my mind that the shocks would be behind the airbags and behind the axle. And a couple of areas that I was thinking of are, one, as close to the frame itself, which is close to the airbag, so the shock and the air spring would work closely. And the other part is more inboard, where there's more room. I'm not going to hit the airbag. And what I don't like about that is, if you think about having a bar and stabilizing it, having something on the further ends gives it more stability than in the center. So moving closer to the air spring, closer to the frame, the challenge there is space. And just checking, and again, I have to take certain frames of reference that are going to be made up. One of which is I'm going to have the bottom of the shock right at the bottom bolt of this lower arm. And if I kind of say, well, if it's going to be there, moving up to a theoretical bar that's about 16 inches. On this side, if I do a measurement, similarly, say I'm going to pull it from the bottom and a little bit more angle, but I also need room to go down. That's going to bring me at 14 inches. So I'm 16 and 14. The next step is to see how much it's going to compress. Now with it fully compressed and having the airbags in, because that will give me any clearance issues, if I do the same measurement, so again, theoretically at the bottom to about this bar, I'm probably getting around 12 inches. And if I go the other area, which is in the frame, or try to get it underneath the frame, again, looking closely there and giving enough room, it's about 10 inches. So the compression's about the same. It'll be 4 inches of compressions. So with those measurements in mind, I do need to make a decision. If I want it inboard, then I can have a longer shock, because the minimum would be 12 that would compress, and then the maximum length would be 16. So anything that's smaller than 12 and higher than 16 will work. But on the inside, that's 10 and 14. So that just limits the size that I can put in there. I have one more idea, and that idea came about me browsing on Reddit. I just happened to see a post about somebody's Camaro and looking for brakes, and they took a picture of the wheels off in the rear, and it's a solid axle. It's got 2 lower link bars, and the shock is attached to the link bar and then to the chassis itself. And I'm thinking, I actually have room. I have room in front that it won't interfere with the upper links. I could put it right on top of the lower links, and similarly, I'm gonna have a bar in the back. I did want to put a bar in the front so I can attach it to there. So looking at these measurements is another option for me, and let me take you through that. I'll save you from seeing me remeasure everything. Basically, at compression, it's 12 inches, at ride height, it's 16 inches, so 4 inches of travel. I'll take you through my third iteration later on in the video, but for now, I'll walk you through how I select the shocks. Now that I know what my maximum compressed length is and minimum stroke, I can now select my shock using this list. This is a full catalog of KYB. Now, it is about 10 years old, so it won't have some newer applications, but it has quite a bit, and I know I'll find something in here. So knowing that the compressed in any option that I want is 10 inches is the minimum that I found, so anything less than 10 would be great. I'm going to put a filter condition that is less than or equal to 10. Then from a stroke, I know I want it at minimum 4 inches of travel, so it could be more than that, so at least 4 inches. A similar filter condition, greater than or equal to, and that'll be 4. Now the next part is the mounting, and I want a bolt hole, so I basically will unselect anything that doesn't say E2. Same with the lower mount, I just want to make sure it's E2, and that doesn't give me much, but hey, there's some options here. Anything that says kg is their gas adjust shock, so I usually just look at that, and I'm limited to really 3, which is front of a 3500, front of a C10, C20, or a rear Corvette. So I think I'm probably going to pick one of these two. Now that we know what shocks I need, we can get those on order. Spoiler alert, I didn't place the order. Let's carry on. Now while we wait for the shocks, I can start welding up all the tabs and bag mounts. So I do have a different way I'm going to approach it, so I'll show you that next. If you watch my earlier videos, I actually use the pedal to pulse as I'm welding. Just this gives me a bit more control with the puddle, and as I'm still new to this and figuring things out, and even in awkward positions, it makes sure that I don't mess up the weld too much. But there are a lot of situations having the pedal is just tough or hard to actually pulse it. So I have a finger trigger. I have tested this. I think I have it dialed in, and this will allow me to just press down and hold as I weld and then let go at the end. But I'm not going to be getting the pulse effect that I have with the pedal. Good thing is that on my machine, I actually have a pulse setting. So I've dialed that in to be a similar kind of beat that I was doing with the pedal, so that I have a pulse that the machine's doing itself, and then using the finger trigger to turn it on and off. So we'll try that out as I weld up the tabs and the mounts. Before I can put any heat in the frame and axle, I need to make some room, and I remove the airbags. Add some more tacks to minimize any movement when I weld. I then start to weld, and weld, and weld. This is going to take me a long time. So I've been welding on and off for a couple of days. Some welds better than others. Here's a sneak peek. I am getting used to all the settings with pulse and everything, and I think I have it dialed in. Some of it is just area, like the corners here were really a pain to get in. I really like the setup bushings, and I wish I had bought more, at least another pair. They make it a lot easier, I find, to weld. You don't have to worry about the bushings burning. And I found that these are slightly oversized to the bushings themselves. So after I'm done welding, everything's cooled off, popping them off, sometimes there's a bit of friction. But then when I put on the side that has urethane bushing, it actually slides in fairly nicely. Still have a bit more welding to do, so I'll just keep on at it, and I'll come back once I've gone as far as I can. One quick tip, if you are new to welding, make sure you clean the metal. So everything's shiny here, it looks clean until you put some acetone or some other cleaner degreaser that will just evaporate off. You don't know how dirty it really is. So you can see here, there's still crud. I usually give a minimum of 2 wipes with the acetone on every section. So you can even see there's still a little bit more in the corner. So it might need just a third. So I'm getting near the end of the welding I can do while the frame is upright. And literally the second last beads of weld, I do this. I see porosity. Now I've already cleaned this up a little bit with a wire brush. It's not because I didn't clean something, it's because I forgot to turn on the gas. All of a sudden it was a blowing up. It was a little while because it's erupting, and I stopped, and right at that point I realized I forgot to turn on the gas. So I use a wire brush. I'm going to get a die grinder to get into a little bit, get as much as the gunk out as I can, clean it up, and then fill in the crater, and then I'll lay a bead across. Oh man, that was a lot of work. It was more than I anticipated, but it was also good. It let me get better with welding. Now, some of the welds aren't so good, some are better, but it let me dial in a technique that worked for me. So one thing, I had to put a little bit more amperage so it would melt the filler rod. So I cranked it up to 135 amps. And then when I started the weld, I just sat there for a little bit just to let everything melt. And I remember seeing a video, I think the YouTuber is Pacific TIG, and he says something like sit and chill, and it just makes so much sense. Just let it melt and then you can move on. And the way I moved on, because everything was a inside corner, so it's up and down, is I would start at the bottom, go up and then back down, up and down, and did a bit of a weave as I went through, and it seemed to turn out a lot better looking welds than what I started off with. On the inside of the tabs, I just couldn't fit the TIG welder in there, so I did use the MIG, so it doesn't look the greatest, but everything outside is there. And talking about welds too, yes, there's some that aren't that good, but a lot of it's going to be hidden, and the only people that are going to know are me and you. And guess what? I have less than 50 subscribers, so it'll be our little secret. Anyway, happy with that. Now I got to move on to the next thing. Okay, what's up next is the temporary cross members. I want to get these off and put the permanent ones in, which is going to be 1.5 round tubing, 1/8 inch thick. Before I do anything, I have to take off this angle iron. It's going to be in the way. Then I have enough room to at least fit the round tubing before I take off any of these temporary ones. I might not be able to tack it in and get this off at the same time, I'll see. And then lastly, similar, I'll do in the front, get the round tubing fitting, cut this off, and then I could tack weld it in. Then I'll move on to how I'm going to mount the shocks. I start off with the angle iron, weakening the tacks, and using a hammer to break them off. Tubing is about a 1/16 inch too long, so I did a quick test fit and sanded down the end. I have the tube roughly in place. While there looks like there's gap here, when you take a cutoff wheel and you look to get these tacks, I'm going to be hitting this tube. I have to take this off anyways to clean it up to get ready for welding. So I'll take this off, get rid of these tacks, take this off, and then I gotta get the hoist out of the way. I get the hoist out of the way and then work on removing the temporary cross member. Before I put the cross member back, I want to prep it. I start off by sanding the outside with some 60 grit sandpaper, and I use a bit of red Scotch-Brite to get off any remaining oil and oxidation. Well, now I gotta figure out where I want to mount it. I know it's generally in this area, but my thought is getting it in between this weld. So right in the middle there on both sides, I do have a rough mark here, but I need to get it more exact, a little bit more precision. Once I have the location, then I can roughly mount it, make sure it's square, and tack it in. I measure and mark off the location so it is in the middle of the weld. Then I take the opportunity to sand down what is left of all the tack welds. Okay, let's see if this fits. I also beveled the edges off camera just to make it easier to get some penetration on this piece. And I know it's very tight. Okay, I have a bit of play, so I'm gonna have to somehow figure out how to hold it. Let's get some magnets. Okay, my thought is if I put these on the line, then I might hold it up on either side. Okay, let's see. I might need stronger magnets. What I don't like about these are the rivets. The other side's not as proud. It's a bit better. Let's see if it's square. Okay, I got it in place. Was tricky. I ended up using 2 magnets, one to get the height that I wanted to, and then one to make sure it doesn't fall back. Made sure everything was square, checked both sides a few times, and even checked from here down, both were a 1/2 inch, so I know it's in place. I gotta tack weld it with these magnets in here. It's gonna be crap, but at least if I get enough of a tack on either side so it doesn't move, I could get rid of the magnets and tack it a bit cleaner. With that rear crossmember more or less in place, I can now focus on the one that is going to be more important because it's going to hold the shocks. And so what I've done here is I've added the airbag back in just so I can make sure I have clearance, and I've kind of set this thing up. So I'm thinking the center of the crossbar is going to be here. Basically the outside of this square, and it coincides with the tape that I have down here, so that brings it to about here, which makes sense. So I could then move this over here and mark it because that's where the center is going to be. From a height perspective, I'm going to do the same as this one, which is a 1/2 inch from the top. It will be a little bit more inwards than that is, but that's fine. I'm just trying to get it in the right spot. I also want to make sure I have enough clearance to the airbag. That is just over 2 1/4. Yeah, maybe 2 5/8. Now I don't have the shocks on hand, so I got to make sure that the shocks don't have a radius more than that. So with the center point known, I can mark it here, remove this cross member, and then prep the permanent cross member to get fitted up. Welcome to the next scene. For you was a split second. For me was almost a week. And I have 3 problems. The first is when I took off this cross member, the rails did spring apart. I thought I noticed it with the back one, but I didn't do anything about it this time because I had this to the right size to basically have a friction fit in. When I put it in, it just dropped down. So I have the pipe clamp bringing it in, and now I have a nice snug fit. Second problem is that I thought this was at 1/2 inch. It's actually at 3/16. Here I have it at 1/2 inch. So visually, doesn't look good. It is going to be covered. The only people who know are you and I, but it's still gonna bother me. So I have 2 options. I could either raise this back one, or since this isn't welded, I bring this down to 13/16. But this will connect to the shocks, which brings me to my third problem is when I step away for some time, I start thinking about different angles of things and how to build it, which is maybe different than what I was thinking before. I'm going to stop myself there and fast forward to what I ended up buying. Shocks came in, but I got stuck in my head again and ended up getting rear C10 shocks instead of the front C10 shocks that I originally had thought. My thinking is it's going to be valved for a rear pickup truck rather than a front that has a heavy engine in it, and felt that it'd probably just work out better. I could be totally wrong because the valving information is not available from KYB. These are a little bit longer, and to make them fit, I did a bunch of measurements, moved everything up and down. I didn't record it because it's the same thing that I've been doing, but the lower mount is going to be moved outwards a little bit. I actually marked off a few places and it's going to be smack in the middle. And the top mount, where originally is going to be positioned vertically down, I moved it to be horizontally towards the engine to give me that extra room to fit this longer shock. One thing I wasn't factoring in my initial design was droop. And droop is when you go over a pothole or any divot in the road and the suspension falls away from the vehicle. If I had picked those front C10 shocks, I would have had maybe 1 inch of droop before the shock would be full extended, which would impact the way that the vehicle would handle. So I measured at 2 inches of droop, ride height, and fully compressed, and that gave me a long list of options. I ended up going with the rear C10 shocks. To me, it made more sense than picking, say, a Karmann Ghia rear shock. I drew up the upper and lower brackets in Fusion, then printed them on paper and made sample parts with cardboard. To make sure I had everything aligned, I used the laser to locate the center line of the bar and project the middle of the upper mount. I also made an alignment tool for the lower mount so I can mark off where the brackets would live and mark them off in that position on the bar. With the locations known, I can see if there will be any interference on the bottom of the shock. At first, the top mounts looked good, but I did notice there might be some interference at full droop. So after a quick design change, that problem was solved. So I'm so happy I took the time to test my shock mount design using cardboard. Ideally, I'd use a 3D printer to be more accurate, but I don't have a 3D printer, so cardboard it is. I was most concerned about interference with the lower mount. It turns out it's the upper mount that I had interference when there was more than 2 inches of droop in the suspension travel. So after a quick redesign, removing some material, it looks like I'm going to be good. I'll know for sure if my redesign works once I have everything cut into metal, but for now, I'll call that a win. And now I have the tabs cut out in metal. I used a new place for me, ready, set, cut, and honestly, this is the best result so far to get somebody to cut parts out of 3/16 inch steel. You can even see it's very smooth on the edges and very little burr left over. I do have to do a little bit of prep, but I'd have to do that anywhere else, like adding a bevel and maybe clean up some of the burrs. But honestly, these came out amazing and not much mill scale, so it's going to be really easy to clean up, unlike some of the previous parts that I've done in the past. When I test fit them with the shock, everything came out perfect. Everything's sitting on the crossmember, sitting on the 4-link bar the way I want it. So yeah, really happy. I'll put a link to their website in the description. If you're in Canada, check them out. They do Canada-wide shipping. And if you're in the West GTA area, you can visit them in person. Well, that was a stupid thing to do. I can't get the bolt out. Should have came in the other way. Anyway, I'll cut that off. You can see that everything's tacked up and mocked up, and these things look great. I'm so happy with the result. Now, I'm gonna leave things off here. I still have to fully weld the mounts and the cross members, but I'm gonna do that and post it on Instagram because I want to get this video out as soon as I can. So keep an eye on my Instagram feed for those videos. So before I let you go, I have to see if this is going to work. So let's see what happens when I raise and lower the axle. And it works. I'm so happy. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.